you're looking for leadership, start with a mirror. If you're looking for leadership, start with a mirror. And that's the core focus of this week's solo podcast. What happens if you are looking for leadership? I'm going to go deep on a couple of different components here and include questions that I typically receive, specifically when it comes to building leadership skills, leading well, and some of the mistakes that we make. So let's start with a quick definition. My definition of leadership is how we move forward. How we move forward. A very simple definition. How we move forward. In order to be able to move forward, we have to know a couple of things. We have to know where we're going. Like, what's the destination? Where do we want to get to? Again, what's that destination? We also need to know where we are. Where are we? Where are we in this journey? Where are we in this journey of self, journey of our business, or even thinking about leadership in the context of family? Where are we from a family perspective? So, simple definition for leadership. Leadership, from my perspective, is how we move forward. That looking for leadership, start with a mirror quote is important to me, primarily because I think too often we're looking for others to lead us. We're looking for leadership in others rather than focusing on leadership of self. The cool thing about leadership of self is you are in control of it. You're in control of how you move forward. You're in control of how you do the things that you do, which that starts to get into culture, but we'll focus on leadership today. So leadership from a definition standpoint, how we move forward. So let's take a look at some of the places where leadership starts. And Dan Cockrell has covered this really well. And he talks about it in his book, How is the Culture of in Your Kingdom? Leadership starts with self. It's a Stoic philosophy. So it didn't start with Dan. It goes back a number of years. Leadership starts with self. So let's talk about self-leadership. What can we do? Well, if I'm interested in moving myself forward, I need to know a couple of things. Where am I? Where do I want to go? If I'm struggling with where I want to go, then I need to start to think about goal setting and execution. I need to find a system, a process, an approach that works for me when it comes to goal setting and execution. What do I want to achieve? What's my objective? What do I want to test? What do I want to do? Now, these are all really tough questions, especially if you've gotten yourself into one of those routines at work where someone just gives you a list of things to do and you go out there and you do it and you punch in and you punch out. And that's fine if that's what you want to do, but you've got to know what your thing is. So how we move forward, know where we are, where we want to go, know what kind of results we're looking to achieve, what our objective is. The other thing about objectives and results and the things we want to achieve is those are going to change over time. You've heard me say this, you cannot reflect on what you're going to do. So get out there and do work. When you go out there and do work, then you can reflect on it and figure out whether or not it's the right work for you. And when you find out that that work is either for you or not for you, then you can make a decision. You can make a decision to keep moving forward, lead self, continue to move forward, or eliminate, cut out the work. Another quote that's a favorite of mine comes from Jim Collins, and it comes from his work with Peter Drucker. It's stop what you would not start. So part of building leadership skills is having a point of view of where you want to go, having an understanding of where you are, having a capability to make effective decisions. The third piece that I think is really important when we're talking about leadership and building leadership skills is problem solving. How do we go through the process of solving problems? You've seen this before when we talked about the hexagon as a framework, and I'll go through it really quickly and joke a little bit about the Mary Poppins approach to problem solving. And if you want to go deep into this, check out any of the episodes, whether they're YouTube videos or previously recorded episodes on problem solving. But the top of the hexagon is what? Let's define the problem first. What problem are we looking to solve? So today we'll talk about a leadership challenge. Who has that problem? Who's impacted by the problem? And who cares about the people who have or are impacted by the problem? That who question helps you gain additional perspective. If you try to solve problems only through the lens of your perspective, you create risk. You might be okay with that risk. But if you can shift perspective, you can overcome blind spots, you can reduce risk, and you might actually get yourself on the path to solving something a bit faster. So problem solving, what problem, who has it, who's impacted, who cares, why does the problem persist? Why does it continue to happen? This is where you get into that root cause analysis type stuff. And why is it important to solve? What's the impact of solving? What changes as a result of solving that problem? If you draw a couple of squiggly lines underneath the top part of that hexagon, you'll have something that looks like an umbrella. And I joke about that being the Mary Poppins approach to problem solving. The thing that we didn't do is get into how. How is that fourth step? And I believe that if you've not gone through and gained clarity on the what, the why, and the who, you've not earned the right to move into how. And on the how side, we want to understand how the problem is being solved today. So we're not spending time, energy, and attention on solving it today. Maybe what makes us think that we're actually going to spend time, energy, and attention on solving it in the future? How might we solve it differently? What are some approaches that we can take to solve things differently? So there's our how questions. Then you get into when, and then build out your short-term, medium-term, and long-term plan, your 30, 60, 90. And there's 6 sides to a hexagon. There's 6 questions that we're going through there. What, who, why, how, when, and then what's our plan? 30, 60, 90. So when it comes to leadership, whether we're talking about leadership of self or leadership of others, and first we have to demonstrate that we can lead self well before we earn the right to lead others. I think it's important to be really clear about what our objectives are, know what we want to accomplish, understand where we are today, reflect on where we are today versus that future vision of where we want to go. Have a framework or tool set that we can use for decision making, and I like 2x2s, and we've talked about those in the past. And then have a tool or framework around problem solving. So goal setting and execution, decision making, problem solving. And then the fourth piece that's important for leaders to do when leading self well is be really clear on communication. And the communication framework that I like to use is the call plan. And as a reminder, there we want to know who we're talking to. Are we communicating with ourselves? What is our objective relative to the communication that we're having? What do we anticipate is the objective of others? And what are our desired next steps? And if we have these tools, that tool set can help us create leverage and grow our capability from a leadership perspective. So where do the skills come from? Well, the skills come from that combination of both learning, listening to a podcast and applying things, going to a conference and taking in new information, watching videos, going through courses, working through a certification, getting the information, the knowledge, and then taking that knowledge and applying it in the context of a work environment, or if we're talking about leading families, your family or home environment, or that last piece, leading self, the individual environment. We need to learn and then apply. So you've heard us talk about this. It's learn, think, act. We learn things, we think, we reflect on it, reflect on how it applies to what we're doing, and we take action and put those things into practice. So as leaders, the way that we build the capability to move forward is through the combination of skills, some of the skills that we just talked through. We create leverage with tools, some of the tools that we talked through. And I think a piece that we tend to miss is this piece around mindset. What are our attitudes and beliefs around leadership? Now, my attitude, my belief around leadership is that leadership starts with self. This is why looking for leadership starts with a mirror. If you're looking for leadership, start with a mirror is so important to me. And it's one of the talks that I can give inside organizations or associations as a keynote. We can do workshop stuff around each of these tools and skills that we were just talking about. When we look at ourselves in the mirror and we start with leading self first, we then earn the right to lead another person. And unfortunately, in many of our organizations, we have a number of people out there that we've thrust into leadership positions. We haven't asked them if they want to help people move forward. They were just really good at the work that they did. Or there are some people who really want to help people move forward, but they look at leadership as a title, not necessarily state of being, mindset, and approach. So my attitude and belief around leadership is that leadership starts with self. And then once you've demonstrated an ability to lead self, you've earned the right to lead another person. And if you can lead another person well, then you've earned the right to lead teams. And if you can lead a team well, then you've earned the right to lead teams of teams or organizations. So some of the common questions that I get one of the common questions that I get is, how do I build my leadership skills? Well, I mentioned a couple of ways that you could do this. One thing to do first, though, is understand that the skills that you want to build. So what are some of those skills? What are some of the gaps? How do you, when you reflect on self, where are some of your gaps? Is it a communication gap? Is it a decision-making gap? Is it a problem-solving gap? Is it a goal-setting and execution gap? Which one of those gaps? Is it some other gap? Is it a situational awareness? Is it a specific industry gap? What are some of the gaps that you have? Once you've identified those gaps, then identify ways, shapes, and forms that you can address those gaps. Now, the first thing I think you need to have before you're going to be able to build a skill set and address the skills is make sure that you have the right mindset when it comes to learning. Do you go into a situation and think, oh, I already know it all, I'm just going to go through the motions? Or do you go through a situation and say, it's like a Mark Twain thing, it's what I know for certain that just ain't so. And that's a Mark Twain quote. And there's so many of these quotes that are out there that can help us gain perspective and shift. And again, one that I want to be known for is looking for leadership. Start with a mirror. Take that reflection and work toward it. So I can build skills by going to conferences, going to events. We're moving into conference season. I'll be at a couple of them later this year. You'll see those on LinkedIn. If you're going to be there, make sure you come by and say hello. If you listen to the podcast, let me know that. Go to conferences. You can listen to podcasts like this. You can read books. Some of my favorite books. One that I go to often is Jurassic Park. The reason Jurassic Park is a powerful book for me is it highlights the entrepreneurial adventure and some of the risks associated with it. It brings together a little bit of math and science. You talk about fractals there. It has dinosaurs. Who doesn't like dinosaurs? And it creates a scenario where you could start to see the perspective of what's happening to others through the eyes of others. So one of my favorite books is Jurassic Park. I think there's a great benefit to reading fiction. On the nonfiction side of things, books like Keller's The One Thing, it's really powerful. Art of War by Sun Tzu is really powerful. Mindset by Carol Dweck is really powerful. And there are a couple of other ones that we've mentioned a couple of different times on the podcast. When I go through and I build those skills, it's important that I put those skills into practice, because if I don't put those skills into practice, I'm going to run into this thing that Ebbinghaus talked about, which is the forgetting curve. So we learn these things, we don't do anything with these things, and then we just go back and do things the way we've always done them. Well, learn, think, act. Learn, plan, do, reflect. These are ways that we can go through and apply the learning that we're doing so that we can get better and move and continue to keep moving things forward, which is, again, what leaders do. So that's how I would think about building skills. Another way to build skills and put skills into practices to work with, someone like me from a coaching perspective, or a number of other people that are out there. We have blind spots, and working with others can create this space where you can ask a couple of questions. And when those questions are asked or reflected on, you can start to gain additional perspective, overcome those blind spots, identify ways to move forward, and get out of your own way. Another thing I like to do when it comes to building skills is make sure that I have clear feedback loops in place. So what are the bump stops? What are the areas that I have time, energy, and attention put into place for me to reflect and say, is this the right work for me? Is this the right thing I'm doing? Is this the right skill to apply? Is this the right tool to apply? If you don't take that feedback, then what can happen is you will start to get into a mode where you continue to keep going and going and going, but you're actually not making any progress, meaning you're not moving forward. If you're not moving forward, you're not being a good leader of self. Another common question that comes up is, how do I lead authority? A number of people have talked about this before. Leadership is not a title. Leadership, I believe, is an act of service. You're acting in service of others. You're helping, well, in the context of self, helping self move forward. So you're acting in service of self by having tools, resources, plans in place to help you move forward. When working with others, you're acting in service of them to help them continue to move forward, either at an individual level or team level. So first thing I would say is don't really worry about the authority piece, because it's not a title. It's an act of service. If you're asking the question about leading without authority, I would ask the question, why? Why do I feel compelled? Why do I want to lead without authority? Is it because of something that I think should be done better or done different? And maybe it's not looking in the mirror, it's pointing at others and saying, hey, you guys should do this, or you should do it this way, or do it that way, or apply this tool, or whatever the thing is. So whenever that lead without authority thing comes up, first thing I want to ask is, why? Is it about a title or is it about something else? Okay. Let's say that it is not about a title and it is about something else. Well, one way that you can demonstrate leadership is, again, doing the work well on your side. Do your job. Lead well by leading self first. People will see it. People will pay attention to it. People will notice that you have that give a shit factor. You give a crap. You have this internal motivation to help people continue to move forward. And you'll see it will start to rub off on others. It will start to make an impact. If you happen to be working with someone who is leading poorly, and that's the reason why you feel compelled to lead in their environment, then I would pull them aside and have a conversation. And this is where you get into that skill around communication. Remember, in that conversation, there's two people that are a part of it. And Jody has said this on the podcast before. One of the biggest mistakes that happens when it comes to communication is believing that it happened. Well, let's make sure that it happened. Trust but verify. Ask questions, gather information, validate understanding. And what you might find out is that the reason why the person is failing in the other area is not really a failure. It's because of a prioritization thing where they're prioritizing things that are a little bit different than what you think those priorities are. So how do I lead without authority? I lead by leading self and demonstrating an ability to do the work, engage in the work, help with others, be there for others. Another question that comes up is, how do I deal with conflict in leadership? And what's kind of interesting about the conflict piece is, and I've seen this in a couple of different ways. I've seen it when there's conflict on leadership teams. And the conflict on leadership teams typically is a result of a lack of alignment in organization objectives. And that is a failure in leadership. You've heard me say this, that revenue challenge inside your business may actually be a culture challenge in disguise. And culture starts with leadership. Leadership starts with self. When we look at leadership, leadership is how we move forward. Culture is how we do the things we do. Revenue is how we fund the ability to do the things that we do. And execution is how we achieve results. Those are my simple definitions. On the conflict side, if you've got a team who is in conflict, where we have different agendas across different people inside the leadership team, that comes back to the leadership group coming together as a team and gaining clarity on what the objective is. And if you're not aligned on it, then maybe changes need to happen in the leadership team. I worked with some folks before where their key thing there was decide, commit, act. So we make a decision, we commit to that decision, we take action. I agree with it 100%. The challenge is when those decisions keep changing and the commitments keep changing and then the actions keep changing. And what happens is we get people moving in 80 different directions. There's a lack of alignment, a lack of clarity, and that lack of alignment, that lack of clarity creates a lack of focus, and that lack of focus gets in the way of execution. So how do I deal with conflict? Number one, first thing I do is I go and I approach the person directly. And I ask this simple question. Help me understand whatever the thing is. Help me understand why we do things this way or how this thing works. How and what questions typically end up being a little bit better than why. Why questions can get people on the defensive. Don't always come in and ask those questions over and over and over again with the idea of expecting a different result or expecting something to change. And create the time and space for that change to happen. Gather the information, gather context, go deeper and validate on things that you don't understand. When you get an understanding, validate understanding, and then see if you've earned the right to make a recommendation or recommend an alternative course of action to help support what's happening in that conflict. Because sometimes that conflict is a result of what you're doing. It may be a result of the way that you're communicating. It may be a result of the way that you're leading self. It may be a result of the way that you are presenting self. I get super excited and passionate about certain things. One of those is the New York Jets. Another one is New York Islanders. Another one is about the value of some of the putters I have, tools that I deliver. There are things that I get passionate about. And unfortunately, sometimes the questions I ask will pass on the impression that I am looking for a specific answer from people. I try to avoid that because I can see a scenario where that happens. And really what I try to do with my questions is help people shift perspective so that they can overcome blind spots and get to the answer on their own. Do I have an idea on what I think that answer is? Absolutely. I mean, there are a number of times where I do. But I have to go back to one of my guiding principles, which is don't limit myself based on preconceived notions. If I go in there with a preconceived notion on something, I might get myself into a situation where I'm creating my own set of bias, adding to the conflict and creating more tension. In fact, I may be the problem. So if you're looking for leadership, start with a mirror. If you found this conversation, and I know it's not much of a conversation because I'm talking into a microphone and a video camera, I'm talking to you directly on it. If you found this interesting, please let me know. If you have questions that you'd like me to go deeper into, please let me know those as well. If you know somebody who would get value out of this podcast, it would help them think different so that they can do different, please share it with them. And if you feel comfortable, let me know that via LinkedIn. Part of what we're doing with the Phoenix Club, which is where we're pointing everybody to these days when it comes to helping leaders think different so that they can do different, either inside organizations, people who are a bit more entrepreneurial, outside of their organization, like building it on their own, whether it's a solopreneur or an entrepreneur, or they want to do these things, but they don't know where to start. Entrepreneur. Phoenix Club might be a place for you. And you can find out more about the Phoenix Club by going to findmycatalyst.com. And there's information on the webpage there. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process? Thank you.